I didn't really expect it is really big like this, but yeah, apparently you are going to show this on the SPtv website, right? Yeah, tonight.
I'm getting
Yep. Okay, so
It's like right now, it's in the front row.
yep, it's aired. Okay, and I'm really glad that I have a guest speaker, Dr. Glen Nowak here. He's currently Senior Advisor to the Director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the Center for Disease Control. Okay, prior to joining NCIRD's senior management team, Dr. Nowak served 6 years as the Chief of Media Relations at CDC and Media Advisor to the CDC Director and Senior Agency Managers. So we all watched that press conference that Dr. Glen Nowak introduced expert for the H1N1 endemic case, and yeah, he's here. So
well, thank you.
Good, and yeah, please give him a big applause.
I must admit, I used to be in the faculty at the University of Georgia, and when I taught, I never had two cameras in the room, and the students never welcomed me with applause, so this is different. Pays to be a guest speaker versus a regular speaker, right? I'll give you a brief bio, a real quick one. I am from Wisconsin, and so I'm a Packer fan and a Brewer fan, and that's still after 19 years of living in Georgia. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee and majored in mass communications and economics. Well, at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, I worked as a newspaper reporter for a community newspaper and ran for school board in my hometown of St. Francis at age 19 and got elected. Beat two people who had been on the school board for 20 years. Don't know quite well. I guess I did that because it paid better than the reporting job. Just tells you how much money both of them paid, not much. After graduating with my bachelor's degree, it was a tough economic times, and there wasn't many jobs that were out there, including in the media. But there was one industry that was hiring. It was the fast food industry. And so I applied at Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's, Taco Bell, you name it. I think I had interviews with about 5 of them and took Burger King, their offer, because you could dress kind of like this with a shirt and a tie without having to wear a uniform. And so I was an assistant manager at a Burger King for about 10, 11 months, which was, it taught me I didn't want to be a fast food restaurant manager. But it also taught me a lot about running a business and the financial side of things and managing people, which has been helpful throughout my career because I've spent a lot of time managing people. I decided to go get my master's degree, and I enrolled at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and got my master's degree in journalism and went on and stayed on to get my PhD in mass communications. Took a lot of courses in advertising, public relations, consumer behavior, marketing in the business school as well as in the psychology program. And my first job, I guess, was at the University of Georgia, where I became an assistant professor of advertising and public relations. Shortly after arriving at the University of Georgia, I got a call from the CDC, and they were doing a project involving public service announcements and wanted to know if I'd be interested in getting involved in that project, looking at the effectiveness of some public service announcements for HIV/AIDS prevention. And I said yes, and that started a long relationship with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. For the 9 years I was on the faculty at the University of Georgia, I spent about 8 years going back and forth between Athens and Atlanta, doing a number of projects for the CDC, everything from conferences to focus group research to helping them go out to communities and talk about how to spend HIV prevention dollars and figure out how to spend that money. And then 1998, I applied for the job of being the first director of communications for CDC's National Immunization Program. And the person who was the director at the time, when he offered me the job, said, "This is a great opportunity. You've taught about communications and public relations. You've studied it. Here's your chance to run an actual office of communications, and you can actually start it. We'll give you 2 people, but my vision is that this will probably have eventually 20, 25 people." And so that's exactly what happened. I managed an office of communications of about 20, 25 people. It included the web, it included campaigns, It included graphics and visual information. It included media relations and public affairs. And it included serving as the primary communications advisor to the director of the National Immunization Program. And I did that for about 5.5 years. And then CDC had a new director, a woman named Julie Gerberding. And Dr. Gerberding was looking for someone to be the media relations director at CDC. And she asked me if I would take that job on an acting basis, since my job at the immunization program involved dealing with a lot of media. And I said yes. And so I took that job and took over that 15-person Office of Public Affairs and Media Relations at CDC. And decided when the job became available on a permanent basis, I applied for it and was hired. And so I spent 6 years as Director of Media Relations at CDC. And that time included serving as not only the Chief of Media Relations, but also directing their branch of social media, new media, and the CDC website. And then I decided after H1N1, which was a pretty labor-intensive endeavor for over a year, dealing with H1N1, that I wanted to spend a little bit more time with my family, my 6-year-old and my 11-year-old, my wife. And I wanted to give up the 7-day-a-week, 24-hour on-call stuff. And Dr. Shookit, who I worked a lot with during the H1N1 response, and she was one of our primary spokespeople, offered me the opportunity to join her management team. And so in November, I switched jobs at CDC and have joined her management team, taking me back to the world of immunizations and respiratory diseases, and letting me do a wider variety of things. I still do media stuff. I still do a lot of communication stuff, but I'm involved in communications science projects, communications research projects, things that I used to do way back when I started my career. So that's my brief biography. There are questions, I guess, people came up with, and Dr. Chang was kind enough to put them by group. And so I will also ask you if you have questions, so we don't have to tie myself to this. But I was interested to see one of the questions was about zombies. And anybody in this class want to confess? Yeah, there we go. He says, I'm excited to hear about what I do at CDC. The only question I have for you is if CDC has a plan for a major zombie outbreak. I don't know that zombies have outbreaks, but the reason that struck that question, what struck me about it is there is a TV show apparently about zombies, right? Yeah. And that show did call CDC about a year ago for advice. And they had some major scientific and medical questions about zombies because they wanted the show to be accurate. So even shows about zombies have to apparently maintain some level of accuracy. And they wanted to know if we had any experts who could answer their questions about how zombies would react under different circumstances and to different medications and to different chemicals and other things. Now, we don't have a zombie expert, just in case you're wondering. But my deputy at the time, the deputy director of media relations at the time, knew somebody who used to work at CDC, who was a chief scientist at CDC, who now is in charge. He's the chief health officer for the state of Pennsylvania, a person named Steve Ostroff. And he thought of Steve, and he said, you know, Steve is the perfect guy to send these people to because Steve has a good sense of humor. He will try to answer their questions as accurately as possible. And so he directed them to Dr. Ostroff, and Dr. Ostroff, I think, has been helping that show with some of the issues about whether zombies can, you know, will be okay under certain circumstances and whether certain things will make them sick or kill them. And so he actually is consulting. And that show does some filming in Atlanta, and they do, I think, have the CDC in it, as I understand it. But they don't actually film at the CDC. So there's a hotel, I think the W Hotel in downtown Atlanta is where they pretend is the CDC headquarters, and that's where they do most of their filming. In my 6 years at CDC as Director of Media Relations, we did get calls on a regular basis from Hollywood. Will Smith visited us for one of the movies that he did. Was it I'm blanking? Yeah. And so he came down to CDC and spent a couple days with his folks at CDC talking to scientists. There's a movie that's coming out, I believe, next year. It stars Kate Winslet, Lawrence Fishburne, Matt Damon. I can't remember the title of it, but they were filming at CDC about 4.5 weeks ago. And I mentioned that Professor Halkowski. It was kind of interesting because the scenes that they were filming at CDC involved parking lots and lots of satellite trucks, tanks, and some military vehicles along the street around and into the CDC. And so we got a couple calls from reporters when they drove. There's a Fox TV station that is down the end of the block. And some of those people on their way into work drove by the CDC and they thought, wow, did I miss something? I mean, usually CDC sends out a press release or lets us know if there's something big, and it looks like there's something huge because, man, there's like 5 satellite trucks parked out there, but it was all part of the movie scene. And then they also filmed a scene where people were protesting at CDC, so they brought in a bunch of people, and so we had to make sure that the media knew that when you see, 500 people outside protesting, those are extras. They're not actually protesting anything, at least not that we're aware of. And so, but we do get involved from Hollywood, and we do try to accommodate those requests as much as we can, because it helps to be accurately portrayed. I mean, although most of these are fictional movies, it helps that they keep the science and the medicine as accurate as possible in the constraints of their movie. And it's good publicity. Even the ones that, probably Outbreak was one of the first movies. They had us bombing a village to get rid of a virus. Probably not a strategy we would typically employ or employ at all. There are better ways to control viruses. But we do get a lot of attention. And so even things like zombies. So. See, even seemingly irrelevant questions are sometimes right on track. How did I decide communications was a choice for me? I've always loved the idea of trying to figure out how to change other people's behavior. Devious person that way, I guess. It's always interesting in what motivates people to do things. What are the reasons behind consumer behavior? Why do they do what they do? And can you change that behavior by changing parts of their environment, whether it's the messages, the communications, the incentives, the environment, the policies, all those sorts of things. Early on, I was really interested in doing that through the news media, and that's why I was interested in journalism and in covering things. And what I discovered when I was a journalist and covering things was that, well, that was interesting, and it gave me a chance to write. I was talking about and reporting on what other people were doing. And I thought, I'd rather do that stuff than write about others who are doing it. And so that spurred me to go into a somewhat different direction to pursue my graduate studies in consumer behavior and how people process information, how people are marketed to, what are some of the strategies behind advertising and public relations, because I was more interested in being among the people who do stuff rather than write about others who do stuff. And then when I got to Georgia and started working with the CDC, I got hooked on the fact that a lot of what we do at CDC has real-world impact. When we make decisions about, children should receive these vaccines, or people should receive these things, or people should do these things, we mean it. And then we have to go and try to figure out how to get people motivated and interested in doing those things. And so it's a lot of fun to have real-world problems, real-world challenges. It's been a lot of fun working on big issues like H1N1. And you're on a big national platform. We, I think, did a pretty good job on H1N1, but if we hadn't, people would have known about it, and they would have taken us, they would have criticized us. And so it's fun, it's exhilarating to be able to be on a kind of a national stage and have to make big decisions and see how they play out. I've had an opportunity throughout my career to go to the White House. In fact, 2 years ago when I was supposed to come up here to speak and do this, I was supposed to do this 2 years ago. And I had to call Professor Halkowski the Saturday before I was supposed to fly up and say, I won't be able to make it. We've discovered a new virus. It looks like that virus is causing a lot of illness. It may be the start of a pandemic. We don't have many pandemics. The last one was about 40 years ago. And this virus, we don't know how serious it's going to be. And on Sunday, instead of flying to Stevens Point, I get to fly to Washington for a meeting at the White House. And so I flew up with Dr. Rich Besser, who was the acting CDC director, to Washington that Sunday to brief many people in Washington at the White House about what we knew about this new flu virus and what we were going to do about it. And so that was really kind of cool to be in the Situation Room at the White House. Didn't get to meet the president; he was out golfing that day, but got to meet many other top people and experience the Situation Room at the White House. So that's what's got me really interested in communications. It's the idea and the challenges of trying to explain things to wider audiences, change people's opinions, shape their beliefs, influence their beliefs and their behaviors. So anybody have a question? I can continue going on my list, but if people want to ask a question. Sure.
Do you still do stuff with HIV? related topics that you said earlier that you previously worked with HIV?
Not directly, and I haven't done that for a number of years. It was great training, though, because in the world of HIV, when I started with the CDC, there was a lot of controversy. There were a lot of different groups and organizations that had different points of view when it came to HIV. The federal government and other governments, when we invested money generally in 3 types of things for HIV. I guess that's 3. Prevention, treatment, and research. Those were the major 3 areas in which we invested money. And what we did at that time, going back about, I guess, 20 years or so, is the idea was we would go to communities and we would have meetings in those communities, and we would bring together as many people who are interested as possible to talk about how much money should go to prevention in that community, how much money should go to treatment, and how much money should go to research. And so what do you think happens when you bring together people who have 3 different things that they value? You ever been in a meeting where somebody disagrees with you? Vehemently so? Yeah, those were some really contentious meetings because you had 1/3 of the people, typically, who were in favor of most of the money going to research. And why did they want money to go to research? Well, they may have been infected with HIV, and they were looking for, they wanted more effective treatments and cures, and so that was their top priority. There were other people and organizations in those rooms who said, no, I mean, that's important, they should get some money, but most of the money should go to prevention. Because if we can prevent people from getting it in the first place, that would be the most effective way to go. Then there were other people who were in the room who were HIV positive, and they said, you know, I think the most money should go to treatment because people like myself need, treatment. And so we would go to these meetings, and they may be a day or day and a half long meetings, and we would listen to their input, and we would try to help them try to come to some kind of agreement about, what percentage should go to each of these areas. When you went into those rooms and into those meetings and into those communities, you knew as a CDC person, at least 2/3 of the people probably were going to disagree with you at the end of the meeting, because only one probably was going to be the top priority. And so you never had any expectations that you were going to walk into those rooms and be, everybody love you and say, man, the CDC is here, this is great. Or when you left, everybody be happy with the decisions that were made. And then when I went to join the immunization program, it was the exact opposite. They were like, who doesn't love vaccines? They're the greatest thing ever. They prevent disease. They help people. I mean, who can't like a good vaccine? It prevents serious illness. It prevents premature death. I mean, there's no downside. But there were, when I joined that program, the beginning of people who were saying, I don't like vaccines. I think there's some safety issues. I don't think we need them. And so they started complaining about vaccines. And the people in the immunization program were kind of taken by surprise. They were like, wow, I mean, we're doing good work here. How could anybody, take and criticize us? But if you had worked in the HIV world at CDC, your expectation and the culture was much different. It was like, wow, some people in the room like me. And so you would see you had a completely different perspective. And so having started in the HIV world and going to the immunization world was actually a good way to go because I could understand how people could have different points of view and could disagree about things that we were recommending. Whereas if I'd started the other way, I probably would have been stunned when I came into the HIV world and said, wow, this is really different. I mean, if you go over to immunization, everybody loves you, or most people love you. And but HIV is still, a challenging area, and there's still challenges about where and how to spend the money. We have, we do campaigns related to HIV prevention, and they include having people know the importance of knowing their HIV status, because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if people know their status, they are less likely to pass the virus on to other people. They're more likely to take protective measures, and so it's real important to educate people. We have a campaign called 9.5 Minutes, which is designed to let people know that every 9.5 minutes in the United States, someone becomes infected with HIV/AIDS. And so it still remains a big problem. May not get as much media attention as it did 20 years ago when it was relatively new, but it hasn't gone away as a serious health issue. Other questions? Yep.
I got a question. I think like every company or person, they have a moment that everything is not perfect. You make a mistake. If you make a mistake, what do you think are the first actions that you have to take in a crisis time or in a crisis? Like, what do you recommend for example, in a company, make a huge mistake?
Like an oil company and their rig blows up. And they say something about, I want my life back. Well, good question. And the first thing we tell people, one of the most important rules of communications is to express empathy, especially in a crisis. Because people want to know that you care before they want to know how much you know about the situation. So it's really important in a crisis, in an emergency. We follow what are generally kind of the rules of risk communications. And there's a handful of people who have kind of developed these guidelines over the span of a number of years. The first rule the first guideline is, when you're communicating in a crisis, be empathetic. Acknowledge that, people are concerned, they are worried. If you've made a mistake, admit it. And if you think about examples that you've seen where people have made mistakes, who has been most successful? Which people have been most successful in terms of turning the situation around? Those who refuse to say they made a mistake, who basically say, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, despite mounting evidence that suggests maybe not, or those who say very early on, I was wrong. Who has more credibility, typically? Yeah, it's the person who comes out. And generally as a society, we're willing to forgive people, maybe not right away, but over time, if they are willing to say, and sincerely say, that I made a mistake, I screwed up. The ones we have a struggle with are the ones who maintain a position of, I was right, and you people are all wrong. And it's your interpretation. You're a bad audience, that, this is a great speech. I know, you guys didn't appreciate it because you're a bad audience. And those people have a lot of difficulty. And so what we tell people is that if we make a mistake, we're best off acknowledging that we made a mistake. You're also best off acknowledging shortly thereafter about what you're going to do about it, right? Because people want to know, how are you going to go forward? What are you going to say and do going forward? And in those messages, typically the strongest ones are ones that also have action. And so you have to be able to say, and here's what we're going to do about it. Now sometimes when we say that to people, they get really worried because they don't yet know what they're going to do about it. They'll say, well, we don't know what we're going to do about it. But the reality is you always can say something like, we're going to put together a group of people or a group of experts who are going to help us identify specific steps. That's actually a step. So you may not know the specific steps you're going to do, but you can say, here's how we're going to come up with them. And that's an action. And people want to know what you're going to do. And so we often recommend that admit the mistake, tell about what you're going to do going forward. If you're uncertain, acknowledge you're uncertain. Say, there's a lot of uncertainty here. For H1N1, the first press conference that Dr. Rich Besser did as a CDC director about H1N1, we had him say about 4 things up front before he even got into the latest update. He told the reporters that we don't have much information. And as a result, some of the recommendations we'll be making in the coming days and coming weeks may change, and they may change quickly as we get more information. So don't be surprised if you see that happen. Guess what happened about a week later? We had to change our school recommendations, our school closing recommendations. We had to change them about 24 hours after we issued them. And we were able to successfully do that because a week before, we told people, don't be surprised if we have to change things really quickly. Now, if we hadn't taken the time to do that, and we changed things really quickly, what would have happened? The media would have written stories about, oh my God, they don't know what they're doing. On Tuesday they said this, and Wednesday they said that. And you can take the steam out of that by telling people early on that that may happen. We also realized early on that one city or one state, depending on what the situation was, might do some things, like close schools. Another city or a state next door might not do that. And so rather than let the media discover that and then write a story about, oh my God, Wisconsin's doing this, Illinois is doing that, and if you're the Illinois paper, you're writing about, God, Wisconsin looks a lot smarter. And we decided what we would do is tell them that that was going to happen, and we did. And so that was one of the other things that Dr. Besser said to them in that first press conference. He said, you're going to see different cities and different states doing different things, and that's okay. You should expect that. And it's a good thing, because we don't know what's going to work, and then we may discover things that work more effectively by people and states and cities trying different things. And so a week later, when they started to notice that cities and states were doing different things, it wasn't a big news story. And it wasn't a negative news story, because we had told them what to expect. If you have a dilemma, and a lot of crises have dilemmas, you don't know what course of action is going to be the best course of action. You could do this, or you could do that. You've got some experience and some judgment that says maybe this is a little bit better than that, but at the end of the day, you really don't know. What's the best thing to do? Tell people that. Say, we have a dilemma. We could do this, and here's the reasons for doing this. We could do this, and here's the reasons for doing this. We've got to make a decision. We're going to go this way. But it's a dilemma. It's a challenge for us, and we're going to keep open-minded. And if this doesn't look like it's working, we might go back and do that. And so that's, again, how you try to manage those crises. But and the other thing is you got to be sincere, and you got to you have to come off as really caring. And so I think one of the things that happened with BP is the chairman at the time underestimated the magnitude of the problem, and didn't realize it was going to consume his life. And that's the other thing we tell people, and that's the other thing we told our scientists and our doctors at CDC when H1N1 started, is you got to get ready, because this is going to be with us for a long time. And if you take the position that your life is going to be back to normal by next week, you're going to be really disappointed come next week when it's not. And then if you have that expectation and things don't go the way you expected, what's going to happen? You're going to show your frustration. You're going to say things you shouldn't say, even including publicly. And so we told ourselves, and we told all the CDC employees, look, we're about to embark on a marathon. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. As a result, you better be prepared to be in this for a long time. Your schedules of working 9 to 5, forget. We are going to figure out how to, manage the shifts so that nobody's working 7 days a week, for 5-6 weeks. And so one of the things we did do was figure out early on how we were going to make sure that if people were working 12-hour shifts, they worked maybe 4 days in a row and then they got 2 days off. Because you can burn people out pretty quickly in long-term crises. And so part of our planning actually is that kind of stuff. But yeah, but the idea is with communications, it's the right words, the right actions, and being sincere. Other questions? Go to the magic list. Let's see. What's the most important thing and number one skill that PR students should have? Any thoughts based on what you've learned so far from Dr. Chang?
Communication.
Communication. What?
Communication.
Okay. And what does that include?
That includes everything. Talking, learning, feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
Explaining.
Yeah, I mean, communications is probably the best. You need a good set of communication skills. That includes good writing skills. In my jobs at CDC, I have to do a lot of writing. I have to do a lot of writing for audiences like you. You're not world-leading experts and scientists. They talk to themselves in kind of specialized language, and we have to spend a lot of time translating that language to things that I can understand. I was a journalism major because I wasn't particularly interested in science and math, and so it's helpful. One of the things I can do at CDC is if I don't understand it, I'm pretty certain that other lay people won't understand it, and so it's getting people to understand. We have to speak in 6th, 7th grade terms. It's being able to be a good listener, because a lot of what I do is listening to people's conversations and their descriptions of the problem, what they think the problem is, and then using what I learned from listening to ask good questions. And so a large part of what I do is ask questions. And they may be questions like,